You're like me, a Homo sapiens, a wise human. Life, a miracle in the universe.
Good morning. Good morning. I feel like I just experienced a flashback. Is it 2019? This is wonderful to see. Glad you're all here to join us today. I hope this will be an uplifting time for all of you. Just a few notes before we begin about what we're doing here today. This is a service for the entire East Castle Place community. And though there will be some hymns and a few scripture readings, service is not specifically Christian or of any other particular spiritual tradition. It's an opportunity for all of us as a community, whatever our faith traditions or backgrounds might be, to come together after what has been, quite honestly, for all of us here and of course for the entire world, a very challenging and very sad time for many people. And the global pandemic that we have experienced has created a new reality that has been marked by loss. These losses are felt by us as individuals and by us as a collective human race. Many of the losses people have experienced are tragic: the loss of people, health, milestones, jobs, financial security. But there are other losses that have occurred as well that also need to be recognized. And these include, for all of us here, a loss of a normal, predictable routine, loss of feelings of safety sometimes, freedom, loss of special events that are usually a part of our life, like weddings and graduations and concerts and games and all those fun things. Grief is the normal and emotional reaction to loss or change of any kind. It's important to feel this and not brush it aside. We grieve the loss of the things we care about, and grief is how loss heals. Most of us associate grief with the individual loss that we experience when someone close to us dies. But grief can take on a number of forms, three of which we have all encountered during this prolonged time of quarantine and isolation. Today we will reflect upon three of these: ambiguous grief, anticipatory grief, and collective grief, and how they have impacted our community here at East Castle. And we will also consider three virtues that can guide us as we're moving forward into our new post-pandemic reality. And these are the traditional values of faith or trust, hope, and love or compassion. And so you could follow along on your program. You'll see that there is a structure to this service. There's music, and we want to thank Charlotte for providing that. Lots of poetry, lots of flowers, and some time of reflection. I want to thank Katie Phillips especially for helping me to put this together. Also want to thank Carrie Sundberg, Jane Peterson, and Cooper for participating in the service today. And let's now begin with Charlotte and Amazing Grace. may have dreamed about for years, over our lifetime, or maybe just for a few months. It includes the time we thought we would have with our loved ones. It includes missed parties and graduations and other significant life events. And because these kind of losses are not often validated or considered real, we might not always share them with other people, talk about them a whole lot, with all the other stuff that's going on in the world. But when we don't share them, that can often lead to some loneliness. These are the kind of losses, ambiguous losses, that people don't show up with a casserole for. But they are very real, and we've all experienced them. Especially real for seniors, lost time. Because we all know, how much time do we have on this earth? And I think as we get older, we realize it's a short time, and so we value that time. Some might say that ambiguous grief is not as painful as the very deep losses many have experienced, losing the lives of loved ones, and of course, they're not. But the grief expert David Kessler notes that we can't compare our losses with somebody else's loss. He says that the worst loss is always your own, whatever it might be. So ponder now. What ambiguous losses have you experienced over the past year? Canceled celebrations, concerts, dining out, ball games, theater, travels, trips you were going to take, even just across town. Time you would have spent with your family and your friends, your loved ones. Graduations canceled, weddings postponed perhaps, baptisms, bar mitzvahs, funerals you couldn't attend. I invite Terry Sumbrick to come forward and share the poem Ambiguous Loss and Uncertain Grief.
This poem is by Louisa Igaloria. Among the many varieties of grief, I've come across ambiguous loss, also sometimes known as uncertain grief. Hanging about in a doorway, unsure of whether to come in or stay outside, just on the porch. When I ask what he wants, he says, "I'm not sure," or "I don't really know." "So tell me the news you've brought," I say. And he clears his throat half a dozen times and tries to begin. I can't seem to form the words. In the half-light, he looks like a child who might have lost his way, but is too embarrassed or scared to admit it. Then he turns, and he looks much older, a 5 o'clock shadow on his chin and around his mouth. He reminds me of the cousin who came knocking one night, crazed with grief, not knowing if any of his family had made it out of their house in a landslide after an earthquake. In such a situation, it's natural to think of the very worst possible thing that could happen. And even if it proves not to be true, the terrible swing from one moment's hope to the next moment's stomach-churning panic is the only thing that registers. Tell me, I say again, I'd rather know. Wouldn't you prefer the clarity of such a loss, such a grief, rather than being kept in the limbo preceding it?
Anticipatory grief. This occurs when we feel a lack of control over future events and a looming sense that more loss is about to come. And we've all lived from day to day over the past year not knowing the full length and breadth of this pandemic, what it will ultimately be. We still don't know. We've heard of waves implies there's more coming. And indeed, they say we're on the 4th wave now. Times we haven't known what to expect. Talk of variants, vulnerability of the elderly, super spreader events. What if they can't create a vaccine? We might have wondered somewhere along the way. Could this go on for years, forever? So many questions about the future. So ponder, how have you experienced anticipatory grief over the past year? Have there been times when you've worried about your loved ones, about your friends, about yourself? Times when you wondered how much longer did you put up with all of this? Have you wondered how many people will ultimately die around the world? Has your life felt out of control? A few months ago, Katie Phillips, our poet here, wrote a poem of her own entitled Pandemic Q&A, and I wanted her to read this because I feel it so well captures what anticipatory grief is all about.
Pandemic Q&A. How are you doing? How's it going? I ask the same questions. I hear the same questions. To the person next to me in the elevator, the checker in the store, the doctor, the nurse treating me, my granddaughter texting, my friend leaving a message, and the answers vary. I'm okay. Okay, I guess. About the same. It's sure getting old. So far, so good. Fine. Really fine. None of us wanting to complain. None of us wanting to be that downer, the one who never stops blaming everyone or everything for every crisis in or out of sight. Pausing for a breath before the next word is formed beneath the mask. A silence that says, it's hard. I'm doing my best. I'm so sad. Will anything ever be the same? Words muffled by distance and cloth, but eyes saying loud and clear, I'm doing everything I can. Oh, I wish this was over.
The third kind of grief that we've pondered today, collective grief. The sense of loss felt by a group of people who encounter an event that affects a great number of lives at the same time and which significantly alters the environment in which they live. Collective grief may result from natural calamities such as a flood or a tornado that destroys an entire community. War, events like 9/11, of course, a global pandemic. These can all trigger collective grief, and it involves a loss of normalcy, a loss of connection, a loss of safety. Collective grief reminds us that we are all vulnerable, no matter how rich or secluded we may be. We are all vulnerable. No one escapes life without challenges. We don't live in isolation. We are always part of something bigger. So ponder. Over the past year, how have you experienced collective grief? Has it felt like the world has changed forever? Like even sometimes experts don't always know what they're saying or doing? Have you been concerned about all the people who've gotten sick? lost their jobs, who faced financial hardships, about all those school children and losing a whole year being together at school, about the emotional, psychological toll that this has taken on so many people, about the loneliness so many have experienced. I invite Katie to come forward again to share a poem by Emily Dickinson, We Grow Accustomed.
Who knew that Emily Dickinson would have a poem that just seems to fit a world pandemic, when her world seemed to us so small? We grow accustomed to the dark. When light is put away, like when a neighbor holds a lamp to witness her goodbye. A moment, we step uncertain for the newness of the night, then fit our vision to the dark and make the road erect. And so of larger darknesses, those evenings of the brain when not a moon disclose a sign or star come out within. The bravest grope a little and sometimes hit a tree directly on the forehead. But as they learn to see, either the darkness alters or something in the sight adjusts itself to midnight, and life steps almost straight.
We turn now to what I'm calling the antidotes to the grief that we've all experienced. And we start with the first of the virtues, faith or trust. In the New Testament, the letter to the Hebrews has what I think is an excellent definition of faith. The assurance of things hoped for and the conviction of things not seen. So I think faith can be an antidote to the ambiguous loss that we've all experienced. Ambiguous loss is what could have been but never was. Faith is what isn't yet but can be. Faith says that there's more than we can see at the moment. Faith says there's a power stronger than our own, a benevolent power that gets us through life's valleys and leads us where we need to go. Faith says that that benevolent power is always there even when we aren't aware of it. Faith trusts that the sun is out there, even on the cloudiest of days, and that we will see it again. So ponder in your own life, your own faith, whatever it might be. How has your faith sustained you through all the losses that we've experienced over the past year? And as you reflect on that, I invite Cooper to come forward, share the poem Least Complicated by Mark Nepo.
Least Complicated by Mark Nepo. Sometimes I go about pitying myself. And all the time I am carried on great winds across the sky. It's in Shiplock saying. Sometimes I lose it, like the keys to the car left in my jeans after that long walk through the pines when I fell into the marsh and the keys were all muddy, caked in my pocket, then tossed in the washing machine. Then you called and there was dinner and bills. And I couldn't find them, and felt that rush of loss, as if I'd left my heart out in the rain and it washed away. how will I get anywhere? Where will I look for my heart? The truth never really goes away, just deeper within, like a turtle pulling back its shell. When afraid, I carry my better self like a glass of water, balanced on a tray, and startled, I spill it and try to gather it on the floor. But once I've made my mess, and tossed the keys, and lost my heart, and spilled my better self on everything, somehow I am brought back. Then I ache to simply feel what I can't understand. Then I stand in the rain and brush the mud from my eyes and laugh. The keys have been in my pocket the whole time. Thank you.
Share a traditional reading from Scripture that speaks also to faith. This is Psalm 46. God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. Therefore we will not fear, though the earth should change, though the mountains shake in the heart of the sea, though its waters roar and foam, though the mountains tremble with its tumult. There is a river whose streams make glad the city of God, the holy habitation of the Most High. God is in the midst of the city. It shall not be moved. God will help it when the morning dawns. The nations are in an uproar. The kingdoms totter. He utters his voice. The earth melts. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our refuge. Come behold the works of the Lord. See what desolations he has brought on the earth. He makes wars cease to the ends of the earth. He breaks the bow and shatters the spear. He burns the shields with fire. Be still and know that I am God. I am exalted among the nations. I am exalted in the earth. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our refuge. Turn to hope, the antidote for anticipatory grief. Like the anticipatory grief, hope looks to the future, acknowledges that there will be tough times, but hope believes that ultimately goodness will prevail. I'd like to share some quotes about hope. Start with John Lennon. He said, "Everything will be okay in the end. If it's not okay, it's not the end." Desmond Tutu said, "Hope is being able to see that there is light despite all of the darkness." Emily Dickinson again. "Hope is the thing with feathers that perches in the soul and sings the tune without the words and never stops at all." Martin Luther King Jr. "We must accept finite disappointment, but never lose infinite hope." So I invite you to ponder, how has hope sustained you during this pandemic? How has it enabled you to endure another day, to get up for another morning, to look forward to better times? I will share with you the poem, "The Hill We Climb" by Amanda Gordon, which she read so poetically and movingly at President Biden's inauguration. When day comes, we ask ourselves, where can we find light in this never-ending shade? The loss we carry, a sea we must wade. We've braved the belly of the beast. We've learned that quiet isn't always peace, and the norms and notions of what just isn't always justice. And yet the dawn is ours before we knew it. Somehow we do it. Somehow we've weathered and witnessed a nation that isn't broken, but simply unfinished. We the successors of a country in a time where a skinny black girl descended from slaves and raised by a single mother can dream of becoming president, only to find herself reciting for one. And yes, we are far from polished, far from pristine, but that doesn't mean we are striving to form a union that is perfect. We are striving to forge a union with purpose, to compose a country committed to all cultures, colors, characters, and conditions of man. And so we lift our gazes not to what stands between us, but what stands before us. We close the divide because we know to put our future first, we must first put our differences aside. We lay down our arms so we can reach out our arms to one another. We seek harm to none and harmony for all. Let the globe, if nothing else, say this is true, that even as we grieved, we grew, that even as we hurt, we hoped, that even as we tired, we tried, that we'll forever be tied together victorious, not because we never again know defeat, but because we will never again sow division. Scripture tells us to envision that everyone shall sit under their own vine and fig tree. And no one shall make them afraid. If we're to live up to our own time, then victory won't lie in the blade, but in all the bridges we've made. That is the promised glade, the hill we climb if only we dare. It's because being American is more than a pride we inherit. It's the past we step into and how we repair it. We've seen a force that would shatter our nation rather than share it, would destroy our country if it meant delaying democracy. And this effort very nearly succeeded. But while democracy can be periodically delayed, it can never be permanently defeated. In this truth, in this faith we trust. For while we have our eyes on the future, history has its eyes on us. This is the era of just redemption. We feared at its inception. We did not feel prepared to be the heirs of such a terrifying hour. But within it we found the power to author a new chapter, to offer hope and laughter to ourselves. So while once we asked, how could we possibly prevail over catastrophe? Now we assert, how could catastrophe possibly prevail over us? We will not march back to what was, but move to what shall be. A country that is bruised but whole, benevolent but bold, fierce and free. We will not be turned around or interrupted by intimidation, because we know our inaction and inertia will be the inheritance of the next generation. Our blunders become their burdens. But one thing is certain. If we merge mercy with might and might with right, then love becomes our legacy and change our children's birthright. So let us leave behind a country better than the one we were left with. Every breath from my bronze-pounded chest, we will raise this wounded world into a wondrous one. We will rise from the gold-limbed hills of the west. We will rise from the wind-swept northeast, where our forefathers first realized revolution. We will rise from the lake-rimmed cities of the Midwestern states. We will rise from the sun-baked south. We will rebuild, reconcile, and recover in every known nook of our nation and every corner called our country. Our people, diverse and beautiful, will emerge, battered and beautiful. When day comes, we step out of the shade, aflame and unafraid. The new dawn blooms as we free it, for there is always light. If only we're brave enough to see it, if only we're brave enough to be it. finally, we come to the last antidote, love. Love, the antidote for collective grief, for all our grief. The antidote to the pain we experience as a community. Love connects us to one another and to a higher power. Love sustains us in times of collective grief. Love helps us to recognize that we are all connected and we are all part of something bigger. Love helps us to see that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. None of us is an island. Love's not the opposite of hate. It's the opposite of fear. Perfect love casts out fear. Love brings meaning and purpose to our lives. It takes many forms. Self-love, love of brothers and sisters and friends, erotic love, parental love, love of our Mother Earth, unconditional love. Some would even challenge us to love our enemies. So I invite you now to ponder, how has love sustained you during this pandemic? How has love connected you with others and with a higher purpose? And as you reflect on that, I invite Jane Peterson to come forward and share the poem, "'Tis a Fearful Thing."
Good morning. This poem is called, as Reverend Harold said, "'Tis a Fearful Thing," and it's by a poet that I don't know, male or female, old or young, Yehuda Halevi. "'Tis a fearful thing to love what death can touch. A fearful thing to love, to hope, to dream to be, and oh, to lose. A thing for fools, this, and a holy thing to love. For your life has lifted me. Your laugh once lived in me. Your word was gift to me. To remember this brings painful joy. 'Tis a human thing, love. A holy thing to love what death has touched.
Another reading about love from St. Paul, 1 Corinthians chapter 13. If I speak in the tongues of mortals and of angels, but do not have love, I am a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. And if I have prophetic powers and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have all faith so as to remove mountains, but do not have love, I am nothing. If I give away all my possessions, if I hand over my body so that I may boast, but do not have love, I gain nothing. Love is patient. Love is kind. Love is not envious or boastful or arrogant or rude. It does not insist on its own way. It is not irritable or resentful. It does not rejoice in wrongdoing, but rejoices in the truth. It bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love never ends. But as for prophecies, they will come to an end. As for tongues, they will cease. As for knowledge, it will come to an end. For we know only in part, and we prophesy only in part. But when the complete comes, the partial will come to an end. When I was a child, I spoke like a child. I I reasoned like a child. When I became an adult, I put an end to childish ways. For now we see in a mirror dimly, but then we will see face to face. I will know fully then, even as I have been fully known. And now faith, hope, and love abide, these three. And the greatest of these is love. Charlotte will now play for us the hymn, O God, our help in ages past. Now receive this benediction. Now may we all go forth, guided by faith, strengthened by hope, motivated by love, knowing that though our lives have been touched by grief and loss, abundant blessings continue to surround us. May we open our hearts and our minds to see them.